Hello everybody and welcome back to another video by Funland Tutorials. In today's video, let us talk about factor intensity reversal, or we sometimes call it FIR, right? Now, where have we found this term? We have found this term in the Heckscher-Ohlin model, which is also called sometimes the HO model, right? Where in the HO model have we found it? We have found it in that part where we do not pay attention and we just assume that those things are there, right? So we find this factor intensity reversal in the assumption sector of the HO model. Now, how does the factor intensity reversal feature in assumption? The HO model assumes that factor intensity reversal does not hold. So it does not happen basically. Now, if I tell you that you should not lie, that lying is bad, that you should not lie, if you have to listen to me and if you have to make sure that you do not lie, you first have to understand what is lying. So if I tell you that make sure that there is no factor intensity reversal in HO model, you first have to understand what is factor intensity reversal. So in today's video, we are going to be talking about just factor intensity reversal. We will not talk about the implications on HO model, the implications of having or not having factor intensity reversal in HO model. We will just understand what the model, the factor intensity reversal concept is. So let me try to explain factor intensity reversal to you visually or graphically. Graphs are something that economists really like. They like it more if my axes are straight, so that should do it. So that is my vertical axis, and I also have a horizontal axis that is also a little bit crooked. So forgive me. So there's a origin here, and one thing is, before you move further into this video, I would suggest that you look at the physical and price definitions of HO model that I will probably connect somewhere here. So you can go and have a look at it because we might be needing it. So if I want to draw the axis for the graph, let me say consider W by R over here, and let me consider Px by Py over here. Okay. So let me begin with a country A. Let me begin with a country A, which I assume first to be labor intensive, and I assume let's say I assume commodity X to be, so not labor intensive, basically labor abundant. So let me correct that. L is labor abundant. Again, if you could identify, write down in the comment section below, I'd be so happy, because that means you are focusing on the lecture or whatever. So let me assume that A is labor abundant and X is labor intensive. Of course, the follow-ups also hold. That means B is capital intensive, B is capital intensive, or capital abundant. I was going to make the same mistake again. B is capital abundant and Y is capital intensive. Okay. So these are the standard assumptions. Now let's go back. These are basically what we consider in the HO model. Now let's go back to the graph. So we see that we have a graph here, and we have W by R on the vertical axis, and we have Px by Py on the horizontal axis. Now let me draw a curve like this, a backward bending curve. This reminds us of the backward bending labor supply curve, right? So let me draw something like this, and let me plot, let's say, the economy B. Let's say this, let me draw the point here, and let me say this is where economy B lies, and let me draw a point A here, and let's say this is where A lies. Let me plot that on the two axes as well. The lines are really crooked here. Okay, right? Now if I draw it this way, I have to mark the axis. So let me write this a little above so that I have space. So this is W by R. This is W by R in B. W by R in B. This is W by R in A. This is Px by Py corresponding to B. So we have Px by Py corresponding to B. And here we have Px by Py corresponding to A. Okay. So this graph is basically explaining the factor intensity reversal. Question is how? The answer is very easy. If you think about A, let's look at point A first. So, or we can actually look at the entire graph till this part. So, we look at this part. We see that as W by R increases, Px by Py increases. Now, let's try to understand what that means. If W is increasing, that means labor is being more used. So if W is increasing, if the laborers are demanding more wage, it means labor is being used more. So labor is being used more, and here Px is rising. There's a correlation between W increasing and Px increasing. W increasing means L is also increasing. So basically we see that as the economy is facing a higher wage rate, it is charging a higher price for the commodity X. And as the economy is seeing a reduction in rate of interest, it is seeing a reduction in the price of Y. Okay. So that is true for this part of the economy. So Px is also increasing. That is true for this section of the graph. If we look at the other side, that is in this section of the graph, we see as W by R is increasing, Px by Py has started to fall. See, if Px, this is increasing and this is falling. So as W by R is increasing, Px by Py has started to fall. Now, remember Px by Py was involved in the price definition of the Heckscher-Ohlin model. So we need to remember, we need to recapitulate the price definition of the Heckscher-Ohlin model. Now think of it, let us try to explain it in this way. If W by R is increasing first and then Px by Py is increasing, but then if W by R increases even further, Px by Py starts to decrease, right? That is what the graph says. No issues with that. But here is the issue. The issue is, remember we used, suppose if we consider W by RB is greater than W by RA, right? So W by RB is greater than W by RA. W by RB is greater than W by RA. What does this mean? It means, what was one implication of this? It means W by B, WB is more. So wage is more in economy B. That means it has less labor. So LB by LA is less than KB by KA. So basically A is labor abundant. Basically this is what they are saying. So this this part, let me use a different color. This color, let's see. So A is labor abundant and they are showing it here. Let's check this side. Px by Py, Px by Py for B Px by Py for B is less than Px by Py for A. Px by Py for B is less than Px by Py for A. Right. Let's see if that is also sort of relevant with what we are learning. Now again, remember the price definition that we discussed. Wasn't the logic something like this? If B is charging you lower price for X, it means B charges you lower price for X, right? That is what the symbol here says. So that means for B, it is easier to produce X. Now, X being labor intensive, if B finds it's easier to produce X, shouldn't that imply that B is labor abundant? So the expression that we have here seems to hint that B is labor abundant. But here we realize that if we write it say in this way, LA by LB, the reciprocal basically, KA by KB, it says A is labor abundant. This is basically what we find here. This is A is labor abundant, but here B is labor abundant. How can two economies be labor abundant? This sort of inconsistency is basically the factor intensity reversal. If you want this to hold, another possibility could be, see here when we are deriving this idea, we are assuming that X is labor intensive. So one way to make these two statements consistent is to remove this. So we said no, this is true, A is labor abundant, here also A is labor abundant. How do I justify? A is also labor abundant. How do I justify it? I say no, X is not labor intensive here, X is capital intensive here. So if X is capital intensive, that means Y is labor intensive. Sorry, X is capital intensive, yes. So Y is labor intensive, is labor intensive. Now, if X is capital intensive, that means B also has more capital. That is why B can produce more X. So the issue is, if you consider the way in which the intensity holds, then the two countries contradict with each other. There are two countries which are labor abundant. That cannot hold. So you have to make sure that the issue is consistent, the two countries are consistent. So if you have to make sure that A is labor abundant in both cases, if you have to make sure that is labor abundant in both cases, in one situation, let me take a red color. In one situation, you have to say X is capital intensive, and then in the other situation, you have to think that no. In this case, X is labor intensive. See, X is labor intensive here and X is capital intensive here. So that means the intensity reverses. Factor intensity reversal. X factor was at first K intensive, then it becomes L intensive, or it was first L intensive, then it becomes K intensive. So that is the factor intensity reversal. That is one way of explaining the factor intensity reversal. This is basically, this is not something that is really to be applied in depth as such. Nobody will probably, I don't think people will ask you to explain factor intensity reversal in so much details. Basically, if you're asked about factor intensity reversal, this graph should be sufficient. Basically, you say that this is a graph. So even if the countries are following the capital abundance and labor abundance the concepts, the statements, there is an issue with applicability of the HO model, which we'll be discussing soon. And essentially, if the factor intensity reversal happens, this is something weird, right? If this happens, then HO model does not hold. So that is basically the essence of factor intensity reversal.